They say some moments brand themselves into your memory forever, not the big ones like weddings or graduations, but the quiet gut punches that come out of nowhere. For me, it happened on a Friday afternoon at 3:17 p.m. to be exact. That's when everything I thought I knew about my marriage started to fracture. I'd wrapped up a client meeting in the city earlier than expected. The presentation had gone smoother than I thought it would, which left me in a pretty good mood. I texted Hannah to see if she wanted to meet for a coffee before heading home, but she didn't respond. No big deal. Her workdays were packed lately. Then a thought hit me: spontaneity. It used to be her thing. Back when we were still dating, I'd surprise her with lunch at her office, or we'd take impulsive road trips to nowhere. Lately, though, we'd fallen into routines that felt more like synchronized commuting than a marriage. I wanted to break that pattern, even just for a moment. So I drove over to La Piazza. Our place. It wasn't just any restaurant. It was the restaurant. The one where I'd stumbled over my words trying to propose, hands shaking as I pulled the ring box from my coat pocket. She had laughed through tears that night, reaching across the table to say yes before I even got through my awkward little speech. That table by the window, it wasn't just any table. It was ours. As I approached the front entrance, the warm golden light from inside spilled onto the sidewalk. I smiled to myself, imagining the look on her face when she'd see me walk in. But then, as I turned toward the large window, my smile froze. She was already there. And she wasn't alone. Hannah sat at our table with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, probably mid-30s, clean-cut, with that slick confidence you see in guys who always assume the world owes them something. They were leaning in close, laughing like old friends or new lovers. She looked radiant, wearing that navy blouse I hadn't seen in weeks, her hair pinned up the way she used to wear it on our dates. My feet stopped moving. Then I saw it. It wasn't a long kiss. Maybe 2 seconds at most. But it wasn't a cheek kiss or a playful air peck. It was a kiss, real and deliberate, shared between two people who clearly weren't meeting for the first time. For a split second, I thought I might be imagining it. That maybe I'd misread the scene through the glass. Maybe it was just some cultural thing, some foreign colleague saying goodbye the way Europeans do. But as I stood there watching them linger over dessert, heads tilted together in some bubble I wasn't invited into, the truth started sinking in. I did something I'm not proud of. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in just enough, and took a photo through the glass. My hands were shaking. Not because of anger. Not yet. It was something worse, disbelief. A numbness creeping in like the early onset of frostbite, dulling everything except the sinking weight in my chest. I didn't storm in or make a scene. I just stood there for another minute, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the city around me, then turned and walked back to my car. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I parked 2 blocks down, sat in silence, and stared at that photo. I zoomed in until the pixels distorted their faces. Then I deleted it. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want evidence. Maybe part of me was hoping to forget what I'd seen if I didn't keep a record. But the image was already seared into my brain like a watermark I couldn't erase. When I got home, Hannah wasn't there yet. I tried to act normal, fed the dog, tossed my blazer on the back of the chair, turned on the TV, but didn't watch anything. My eyes kept drifting to the clock, counting the minutes. She finally walked in a little after 6. "Hey," she said, smiling as she kicked off her heels. "Sorry, work lunch ran long. We were negotiating something with the London team." The London team. I stared at her for a moment too long. "You were at La Piazza." She blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah. How'd you know?" I shrugged. "I was nearby for a meeting. Thought I'd surprise you." She paused. Just for a second. But I noticed it. "Oh," she said, laughing nervously. "You should have come in." Didn't want to interrupt. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine. "It was just Jamie from the UK office. You'd like him, actually. Total workaholic. You kissed him." That stopped her cold. The glass trembled slightly in her hand before she set it down on the counter. She turned around slowly. "Matt, that wasn't anything. He's just flirty. Europeans are like that. It's a cultural thing. It didn't mean anything." I nodded. "You believe me, right?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. I nodded again, slower this time. "Yeah, sure. But the truth is, I didn't. Not really." Something inside me shifted in that moment. Like a door quietly closing in the back of my mind. I didn't press her further. Didn't accuse, didn't demand. I just stood there, listening to the clink of ice cubes in her glass and the sound of our dog snoring in the hallway, and I realized something had changed. Not just in her. In me. I used to feel this invisible thread between us. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like a current that hummed beneath everything, a quiet knowing that no matter what, we were connected. But that thread went slack that night. Not severed, not yet. Just loose. Fragile. She curled up on the couch, scrolling through emails and making comments about some vendor issues overseas. I answered with monosyllables. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did and didn't want to ask why. Later, she went to bed early. Said she had to be up for a morning call with Tokyo. I stayed downstairs, alone with the TV and my thoughts, playing and replaying what I saw at that window table. And the more I thought about it, the less I believed her explanation. Because I've kissed my coworkers goodbye on occasion. Quick, friendly gestures. Nothing that looked like that. Nothing with that softness, that slow familiarity. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I just lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the thermostat, wondering when things had started to drift off course and if we were already too far gone to reel them back in. The next morning, everything was normal. Which honestly made it worse. She kissed my cheek before leaving for work, asked me to pick up coffee pods on my way home. I said I would. She smiled and that was it. Just like always. But it didn't feel like always. It felt like the start of something I didn't understand yet. And somewhere deep down, I already knew I wasn't imagining things. It's strange how hindsight works, like flipping on a light in a room you didn't even know was dark. After that afternoon at La Piazza, I couldn't stop replaying moments that had once seemed harmless. I kept telling myself that I didn't want to become one of those paranoid guys digging through phone records or tailing their wives, but the truth is, the digging had already started. I just didn't have a shovel in my hand yet. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of noise, but the new quiet between us. The kind of quiet that used to only exist after an argument or during long, sleepy road trips. But this was different. It was calculated, filled with careful word choices and fake laughs. A version of Hannah that was just slightly off. Like a recording of her set to half speed. She started working late more often. Meetings that couldn't be rescheduled, last-minute deadlines, late-night Zoom calls with her international team, excuses she rattled off casually like she'd rehearsed them. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But then I noticed her phone was always on silent. Not vibrate silent. Screen face down. And that was new. Before, she used to leave her phone charging on the kitchen counter while we cooked dinner together. Now it was always within arm's reach like an extension of her hand. She even started taking it into the bathroom with her. She claimed she used it to play music in the shower. Cute, right? Except the music never played out loud anymore. She wore Bluetooth earbuds now. And there were little things, odd things, that started to pile up in the corners of my brain. She changed the password on our shared Netflix profile. When I asked her why, she said she'd gotten logged out at work and just reset it quickly. That wasn't a big deal. But then the shared Google Calendar, something we'd used religiously to manage trips, family events, even dog grooming, had missing entries. Her yoga sessions had no location details anymore. No timestamps. Just vague wellness blocks every Thursday evening. Yoga with friends, she said. The same friends I never seemed to hear from anymore. One night, I went to grab her coat from the hallway to hang it up, something I'd done 100 times before, and that's when I caught it. Cologne. Not hers. Not mine. Something sharper. Expensive. Not a scent I could place, but one I wouldn't forget. She caught me sniffing the collar and laughed it off. Oh, that's Jamie. He wears way too much of that stuff. We hugged goodbye earlier. That was the first time she'd mentioned him since the restaurant. Said it so casually, like I was crazy for asking. European, she added again, as if that explained everything. But something had shifted in me. I didn't bring it up. Didn't accuse. I just nodded, set the coat back on the hook, and filed it away like all the other little moments that had started to add up into a pattern. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing beside me, wondering who this woman was and when exactly I'd stopped recognizing her. That weekend, I found her backup phone. Technically, it wasn't hidden. It was her old phone, the one she used before upgrading 6 months earlier. I found it in a drawer in her office, wedged between warranty documents and a charger that didn't work anymore. I plugged it in, half expecting it to be wiped clean. It wasn't. But the passcode had changed. That was enough to confirm what I already feared. She wasn't sloppy. She wasn't careless. She was deliberate. Intentional. And she didn't want me to see whatever was still on that phone. I didn't confront her. Instead, I started watching her. Not in a creepy way. More like gathering data. I paid attention. Took mental notes. I watched the way she tensed up when her phone buzzed and she flipped it over without checking. I noticed how she showered before dinner instead of after, and how she'd come home wearing new lipstick I hadn't seen before, only to wipe it off before we sat down to eat. I even watched her favorite perfume bottle on the vanity, how it emptied more quickly than usual even though I hadn't smelled it on her in weeks. Then there was the rideshare thing. We had a joint account with a local taxi app. Just a small thing for convenience, easy to expense for work. But one night, while trying to book a car for myself, I noticed something odd: the trip history. There were double the number of rides there should have been. When I asked Hannah about it, she told me the charges were probably from surge pricing or billing errors. They do that sometimes, she said, brushing past me with her gym bag. I'll check it later. But she never did. When I looked again a few days later, the rides were gone. Deleted. I didn't know what made me more upset, that she'd lied or that she'd anticipated I'd look. I started to withdraw after that. Not out of spite, out of preservation. Something inside me had quietly started taking inventory of the damage, calculating the cost of pretending this was still okay. I stopped trying to initiate conversation in the mornings. I let her say goodnight first, then waited to hear the bathroom door click shut before I turned off my light. I didn't check her phone. I didn't hack her email. But I was building a mental archive, every detail, every inconsistency, every "I'm just tired and you're being paranoid." A few weeks into this quiet war inside my head, I caught myself doing something that made my stomach twist. I started talking less at work. Avoiding eye contact. Cutting meetings short. I wasn't focused anymore. I was spiraling quietly behind a polite smile. I kept coming back to one question: how long had this been happening? And worse, had it ever stopped? Maybe it wasn't just Jamie. Maybe Jamie was just the one I caught. The only one I happened to see. The possibility scared the hell out of me. It made me doubt everything: the anniversary trips, the late-night giggles from her home office, the time she told me she'd accidentally double-booked our weekend plans with a girls' trip I was never invited to. I remembered how she'd come back from that trip exhausted and smiling. How she'd tossed her phone face down and disappeared into the bathroom with her phone for 20 minutes, only to emerge wearing that same perfume and asking me if I wanted to order takeout. I remembered the moment because I'd felt a twinge of guilt. I had asked too many questions. Been too distant. I had apologized to her. And now, standing in the middle of our kitchen, watching the shadows stretch across the tile floor, I finally said it out loud. She's cheating on me. The words didn't echo. They didn't even feel dramatic. They just were. There wasn't a punch in the gut. No burst of rage. Just quiet confirmation. Like hearing a diagnosis you already suspected. I wasn't crazy. This was real. And as much as I wanted to believe we could somehow come back from it, I knew deep down I'd already started counting down. Counting days. Counting questions. Counting the moments she would never be able to explain. The funny thing is, once you accept the truth, it becomes easier to act. The grief dulls just enough to let in a little clarity. And in that tiny space, I made a decision. If she was going to lie, I was going to find the truth on my own terms. And when I found it, I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to take everything she thought I didn't know and turn it into something she never saw coming. The morning I found the messages, the sky was overcast, like the universe was mirroring my mood. Hannah had already left for work or wherever she was going. She always left early now, even on days when she didn't need to. No more breakfast together. No more morning coffee in bed. Just the sound of her heels clicking down the hallway and the front door closing behind her like a full stop at the end of a sentence. I made a decision that morning. I needed proof. I couldn't keep playing detective with scraps of intuition and circumstantial weirdness. I needed something undeniable. Something I could hold in my hand and say, "Here, this is what happened to us." And I knew just where to look. Her old laptop. It was tucked in the bottom drawer of her desk, half buried under stacks of cables, and a notebook labeled 2019 Goals. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it earlier. She hadn't touched the thing in months, maybe longer, but I figured if there were digital ghosts to find, that's where they'd be hiding. I charged it, waited, held my breath. It booted up slowly, blinking to life with that familiar hum. And just like that, I was in. No password required. Maybe she didn't think I'd look. Or maybe she'd just forgotten. Either way, it felt like I'd opened a door I wasn't supposed to even knock on. The desktop was cluttered: PDFs, screensh *TS. Random folders labeled things like budget and wedding pics. I didn't know where to start. But then I remembered something. Sync folders. Auto backups. Cloud storage. I dug into the system settings and found the remnants of a synced email account. Her old work email, no longer active but with cached files that hadn't been fully wiped. That's when I decided to install a file recovery program. Something basic, just to crawl the hard drive and see what had been deleted recently. Took hours. I left the laptop running in the background while I pretended to go about my day. Walked the dog. Answered work emails. Tried not to check the screen every 30 seconds. But the pit in my stomach kept growing. I think part of me was hoping the program would come up empty. That maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding and I'd find nothing but junk files and archived invoices. But that's not what happened. Late that afternoon, the software pinged. 214 recovered files. Most were harmless documents, images, things she'd probably meant to erase before donating the device. But one folder caught my eye. It was buried 3 levels deep in a cache labeled temp sync _. Inside were **ts, email drafts, a few saved photos, and then the messages. They were exported chat logs, pulled from some old syncing service I'd never even heard of. The kind of thing you'd forget was active unless you were trying to cover your tracks. There were hundreds of them, all between Hannah and a contact saved as J. Green Circle, Jamie. Took me 3 messages to know for sure. The way he greeted her, the pet names, the little emojis she never used with me. It was like watching her speak a language I didn't even know she spoke. I scrolled and scrolled, and what I read made my skin crawl. They weren't just flirting. They were involved. Deeply, romantically, emotionally, and yes, physically. I read about dinner plans and hotel reservations. About that trip she took for work, where they spent the weekend at a vineyard and he surprised her with a bracelet. I read about late-night calls, about how he made her laugh in ways I apparently hadn't in years. I read her words telling him that being around me was suffocating, that I was too stable, too predictable. She said she felt seen by him, loved, desired. They joked about the lies they told me, about the fake meetings, the taxi rides, the cover stories. I found one thread from the day I'd seen them at La Piazza. She had written, "Matt saw us, but I played it off. Said you were just some Euro flirt. He totally bought it. God, he's so easy to fool sometimes." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Reread it. Memorized it. I don't even remember setting the laptop down. But somehow I ended up in the kitchen, leaning against the counter like someone had just punched the air out of my lungs. There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes with reading your own name in someone else's secret life. It's not just betrayal. It's humiliation. A sense that you were the punchline to a private joke, an extra in your own story. And that stings worse than anything else. I don't know how long I stood there. I remember the light changing, the room getting dimmer. The dog patted in at some point and nudged my leg. I reached down and scratched behind his ear, grounding myself in something real, something still loyal. Then I went back to the laptop. I copied the messages to a USB drive. Every thread, every file. I didn't skip a thing. Not because I planned to confront her with it. Not yet. I didn't want her tears. I didn't want her half-baked apologies or her gaslighting explanations. I wanted the truth, unfiltered, in my possession. There was one final thing. A calendar entry. She had marked an upcoming Friday night with a heart and a note. Jay's birthday, hotel at 7, room 602. That was 2 weeks from now. She had planned to spend the night with him. While I probably would have been home watching reruns, ordering takeout, maybe wondering why she wasn't picking up her phone. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't even feel like yelling. I felt cold. Like the part of me that had tried to give her the benefit of the doubt had finally switched off. I backed everything up twice. Then I shut the laptop, slid it back into the drawer, and left the room without a sound. Later that evening, when she got home, I was already upstairs reading. She peeked her head into the room. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, acting like she hadn't spent the day texting the man she was cheating with. "Yeah," I said without looking up. "Just tired." She smiled. "Same here. Long day. I bet." She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Or if she did, she didn't mention it. She just kissed me on the cheek, said she was going to shower, and disappeared into the bathroom. Her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. I closed the book, listened to the water running, and made a promise to myself. The next time she lied to me, I wouldn't question my instincts. I wouldn't ask for explanations. I wouldn't play the role of the clueless husband anymore. Because now I knew the truth. And she had no idea just how far I was willing to go to make her regret ever underestimating me. The thing about betrayal is it burns everything. But if you're smart, if you can hold back just long enough, you can sift through the ashes and rebuild something stronger. Sharper. That's what I did. After I found the messages between Hannah and Jamie, something inside me shut down, and something else lit up. The heartbreak didn't go away, but it calcified into focus. I wasn't interested in pleading or begging or even confronting her anymore. That kind of response would have given her power, and she didn't deserve any more of it. Instead, I started planning. Not revenge. Not exactly. Something more surgical than that. Precise. Clean. I wanted control. I wanted leverage. And I knew exactly where to find it. Our company. See, Hannah and I didn't just share a marriage. We shared a business. A logistics software firm I had co-founded 8 years ago, and where she had climbed her way into leadership over time. I had built the platform from the ground up, line by line, system by system. Every line of code had my fingerprint. Every function had my name somewhere in its ancestry. Back when we were still in sync, I thought of our business like our child, something we'd raised together. Now, it felt more like the vault that housed my freedom. So I went digging. First, just out of curiosity. I pulled up old contracts, archived documents from the early days of incorporation, licensing deals, and shareholder agreements. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Just following a thread, hoping it led somewhere useful. It did. Buried in the original framework documents was a clause I had forgotten I even wrote. The proprietary platform, the code that powered our logistics software, was licensed exclusively to the company through me. Not through the business. Not through the board. Through my personal consent. And that consent was revocable. Not only that, but a later addendum to our partnership agreement. One she'd co-signed without reading carefully back in 2019. Stipulated that any transition in technical leadership required my written approval. So while the company might have grown, while Hannah and her father Greg, our largest investor, had padded the board with their allies, I still held the keys to the kingdom. Quietly, legally, and they didn't know it. That was when everything shifted for me. I stopped being the hurt husband and started acting like the original architect of their empire. Because that's what I was. And while they were laughing behind my back, sneaking around hotel rooms and making birthday plans behind closed doors, I was building the foundation of their downfall. One document at a time. I consulted a lawyer. A good one. I didn't tell him everything. Just enough. Told him I was worried about future disputes, potential transitions in leadership, IP protections. I wanted to make sure my ownership of the software remained airtight, and that if anything happened to me or my role, the licensing agreement would trigger a shutdown clause. He looked over the contracts and nodded. "You've got more power than you realize," he said. "If this goes sideways, they're going to need your cooperation for everything." I smiled. That's the idea. From that point on, I played dumb. I nodded through meetings, responded to emails with "great idea" and "sounds good to me." I even made a few helpful suggestions in strategy sessions, just enough to stay involved, but not enough to attract attention. Meanwhile, I quietly began isolating my access. I rerouted certain code repositories through a private server only I could access. I set up alerts for changes to board membership filings. I withdrew my signature from auto-renewal clauses buried in partner contracts. I even adjusted the usage license on our central API, something only I had the admin authority to do. And I documented everything. *TS. Timestamps. File logs. If they were going to try and push me out personally or professionally, I was going to make sure they walked into a legal buzzsaw. The whole time, Hannah acted like nothing was wrong. She kissed me goodnight. Made jokes about vendors. Asked if I could pick up dry cleaning. It was surreal, living in this parallel reality where we were still technically married and technically partners while I quietly constructed a firewall around every inch of my world. Then came the rumor. A friend of mine from the accounting team, someone I trusted, pulled me aside after a quarterly report review. He hesitated before speaking. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but Greg's been having a lot of private calls with outside consultants. And he's been meeting with a couple of board members off hours. The word going around is that they're planning to restructure leadership, maybe move you into a strategic advisor role. I didn't flinch. Thanks for the heads up, I said. But inside I was boiling. Not with fear, just cold certainty. It was happening. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was coordinated. Corporate. That's when I shifted into my final phase. I contacted a forensic compliance firm. Hired them discreetly to conduct an internal audit. I told them I suspected misappropriation of vendor funds but didn't mention names. Just told them I wanted to protect the company from potential legal fallout if something shady was going on. It was sh*T in the dark. But sometimes darkness hides more than you expect. While the audit was underway, I scheduled a meeting with a private business mediator, someone who specialized in executive transitions. I wanted him ready just in case, because I knew what was coming. A week later, Hannah came home and casually mentioned an emergency board meeting her father had scheduled for the following Friday. Said it was about strategic alignment and overseas growth. I nodded. Sounds important, I said. She smiled. It'll be quick. Just one of those formality things. But I could see it in her eyes. She thought they were going to blindside me. Freeze me out. Take the company and by extension everything I had left. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was still in the dark. What they didn't realize, what they never saw coming, was that I had already lit the match. And everything they'd built on lies and secrets? It was about to go up in smoke. The morning of the board meeting felt eerily calm. The sun was out. The air was crisp. It was the kind of day that would have once inspired Hannah to drag me to a farmer's market or an overpriced brunch place. But now? Now it felt like a pause before a storm, one I was no longer afraid of. They thought I'd show up oblivious, blindsided by what they were about to pull. They were wrong. I arrived 15 minutes early to the office, not because I needed to prepare, but because I wanted to sit in my corner office one last time as a symbol. Let them wonder if I suspected anything. Let them think I was the loyal, predictable partner they could quietly push out with a round of fake smiles and phony resolutions. The boardroom was buzzing when I entered. Greg, Hannah's father, was seated at the head of the table wearing a navy blazer he reserved for moments when he wanted to look more statesman than businessman. Hannah sat 2 chairs down from him, flipping through a packet of notes, dressed in a pale blue blouse and heels she once wore on our anniversary. Symbolism, perhaps? Or maybe she just thought it looked sharp. Either way, I noticed. Everyone else, 7 in total, was already seated. People I'd worked beside for years. Some of them loyal. Some of them bought. I took my seat without saying a word. Let's get started, Greg said, rapping his knuckles on the table. He launched into a rehearsed monologue about company growth, opportunity for global expansion, the need for fresh technical strategy as we scale beyond our current infrastructure. Everyone nodded, pretending like this wasn't a setup. Like I didn't already know the plan. Then came the pivot. With that in mind, Greg continued, we believe the company would benefit from a transition in leadership. Effective immediately, we'd like to nominate Hannah as acting CEO to guide us into this next phase. Matt, of course, would remain on board in a strategic advisory role, an essential voice in shaping future innovations. I didn't blink. Not when he said transition. Not when he said strategic advisory role. Not even when he added, we've already spoken with legal about executing the paperwork after this meeting. I leaned forward slightly. Cleared my throat. Is that your motion? Greg raised his eyebrows. Yes. All in favor. A few hands went up. Not all. But enough. Opposed? I raised mine. There was an awkward pause. Well, Greg said, trying to smile, we'll have the team handle the details with you privately, Matt. This is just the formal. No, I said, cutting him off. We won't. Hannah sat straighter. Matt. I turned to her, then to the board. I'd like to enter a countermotion, I said calmly. Specifically, to suspend all leadership transition efforts, effective immediately, and to reaffirm the current licensing arrangement between me and the company. Greg gave a tight laugh. Matt, let's not make this contentious. This is what's best for the company. No, I repeated. What's best for the company is knowing it can still operate tomorrow. Now I had everyone's attention. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, one I'd prepared the night before with the help of my attorney. Inside were copies of the original software licensing agreement. The clause that clearly stated the platform was not owned by the company but licensed through me. A clause that required my written consent to transfer or amend access. I slid the documents across the table. As of this morning, I said, I've paused all software support and withdrawn all automatic renewals. Any changes in leadership require my consent, which I do not give. Greg grabbed the pages, flipping through them with shaking hands. Don't be ridiculous, he muttered. It's all there, I replied. You never owned the technology. You leased it. And I built in escape clauses, ones you all signed without reading back when this was just a tiny operation run out of a two-room co-working space. Someone near the end of the table, Angela, head of compliance, began scanning the documents faster. Her eyes widened. Is this accurate? She asked. Greg didn't answer. I've also included an independent audit, I continued, sliding a second folder forward. It outlines how long the company could sustain operations without access to the platform. 3 weeks. That's how long the firm had before every back-end system would go dark, automated routing, vendor integrations, client dashboards, all frozen. If you try to circumvent this, I said, looking directly at Greg, you'll trigger a breach of contract. Not to mention potential criminal liability if you attempt to replicate or transfer proprietary tech without authorization. Greg slammed the folder shut. This is extortion. No, I said. This is protection. I protected the company from exactly this kind of short-sighted, self-serving power grab. And I'm using the same system that built your careers to stop you from tearing it apart. The room went silent. Hannah looked pale. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring down at her notes like they might save her. I trusted you, I said quietly, only to her. Not just with this company. With everything. She didn't respond. Didn't apologize. Just sat there like a student waiting for a fire drill to end. Angela cleared her throat again. This changes everything, she said. If what Matt's saying holds up legally, and I believe it does, we'll need to halt all restructuring efforts immediately. Greg stood, puffing up like he always did when he felt cornered. This is a bluff. No, I said. This is what happens when you forget who built the engine while you were too busy polishing the hood ornament. He looked at Hannah, expecting her to speak. She didn't. Fine, he spat. What do you want, Matt? I want the meeting adjourned, I said. I want a full board review of the licensing agreement. And I want a new vote, one that takes place after everyone's had a chance to read what they actually signed. Someone near the back mumbled, seconded. Greg's face was red now. But it was over. The motion to adjourn passed with 6 out of 9 votes. I packed my folders and stood. The room was quiet, everyone suddenly very interested in their water bottles, notepads, or fingernails. I walked toward the door. Paused. And without turning back, I said, next time you plan a coup, Greg, make sure the castle doesn't belong to the guy you're trying to overthrow. Then I walked out.